Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Yui Shousetsu. She's a limited 4-star caster introduced in the Samurai Remnant crossover, and she's gotten quite a bit of hype recently. There's word going around that she's some sort of magic pill to cure the weaknesses of every card type and erectile dysfunction. Okay, maybe one of those is true. Now let's take a closer look and find out for ourselves. For anyone curious, her first name is Shousetsu, but I'm just gonna call her Yui because that's way easier. The linchpin of Yui's kit is her noble phantasm, Selfless Liberator, Atma Parityaga. The interesting bit is the part that scales with levels. Yui gains buffs based on the card type steroids her allies already have at the time of its activation. If they have a quick buff, they gain 3 turns of attack damage. If they've got an arts buff, they get crit damage. And if they have buster buff, they gain NP damage. These are useful effects, and I suppose a part of why people seem to think Yui quote-unquote fixes card types is that arts effect. Arts servants can't rely on free stars or crit damage to the same extent that the other card types can, so Yui filling the gap is a nice benefit. Another notable benefit of Selfless Liberator is that NP damage buffs amplify Oberon's effectiveness, so even non-buster servants can benefit from gaining that effect if you're running a team that incorporates both. Now there are some caveats for using this. Firstly, these effects are only applied if the correct buff is on your servant's bar. Passive effects and craft essences don't count towards Selfless Liberator's activation, neither do unremovable boxed buffs, or so I hear. Haven't had a chance to test that part myself. The second caveat. Some noble phantasms generate a single turn rainbow buff as a part of their effect. You can technically write off these by putting Selfless Liberator right after it, but not only does this waste your overcharge on a measly 1k additional healing, but you're very much letting the tail wag the dog. What's the point of giving a servant Yui's buffs after they've already used their big damage tool? My advice would be to use this sub-strategy opportunistically and not as your primary game plan going into a fight. I've got quite a bit of good news though. Yui herself can activate the arts component of Selfless Liberator with her third skill, Magecraft Elemental. It's a targeted arts and crit damage buff. Regardless of who you target, Yui gains 30% charge at max level. So hypothetically, you just need to find a way of getting quick and buster buffs onto a servant to get full value from Selfless Liberator. Option 1 is to use Ruler Scotty, who provides both on a standard skill. I'd only do this if your chosen attacker is a quick servant, since her skill set is primarily aimed at them with a bit of buster crit support as a bonus. Option 2 is to find an attacker that naturally meets both of their requirements as a part of their skill set, whether with hybrid quick and buster or full-on rainbow buffs. Gonna rattle off some options and then we can examine some of the more promising candidates. Muramasa, Miyamoto Iori, Santa Carna, Summer Okita Alter, Britomart, Don Quixote, Neza, Enkidu, Emiya Archer, Chloe, Emiya Alter, Chiron, Ashwataman, Takasugi Shinsaku, Durga, Saikama Koichi, Summer Ishtar, Kyokute Bakin, Hasana Thunder Personas, Huyanzhou, Gray, Danzo, Kyokoyo, Zhang Yu, Geronimo, Izumo no Okuni, Karen, Ruler Da Vinci, Ruler Moriarty, Space Ishtar, Ushi Gozen, Bizette, Alter Ego Okita Alter, Mysterious Idol X Alter, Wanjina, and 9 Tattoo Dragon Eliza. Of these, I have a particular affinity for Iori, who's a welfare servant from the same event as Yui, so you're guaranteed to get him at full strength as long as you play the event. Bizette is also very interesting since she's liable to take a lot of damage outside of her evasion turn, so she gets extra mileage off of Yui's heal. Lastly, I can vouch for Huyanzhou, who has a crit steroid in her kit, buff removal resistance to retain all these effects in more challenging fights, and a multi-turn invuln pierce to punch through stubborn enemies. That last part is particularly nice since Yui competes for party real estate with other secondary buffers like Calamity Jane, who'd be your main source of invuln pierce otherwise. Now there are some esoteric ways of getting additional buffs onto your main attacker, but I'd avoid option 3, which is to use even more supports to brute force the strategy. Wasukabe Hime, Helena, or supportive Chiron could hypothetically let you run Yui with a servant that has none of their own card type steroids, but I don't think it's worth it to distort your team building that much to get Yui synergy. At that point, play to your servant's strengths and you'll probably get better results. But you can bullshit the synergy in less disruptive ways, which brings us to option 4. Way back in 2016 and 2018, we had a little event called Journey to the West. It's a decent read for such an early event. Fucking awful to farm though. But the point is that this event came with a free craft essence called Ox Demon King. On entry, its holder gives your whole frontline a 3-turn buster buff. Because it shows up in your bar, it counts for Selfless Liberator. It's an extremely useful tool for Yui, and on arts teams especially you can stick it on her directly, without compromising your ability to NP on turn 1. The catch is that Ox Demon King is unobtainable as of this writing. If you miss the Journey to the West rerun, that's it. The ship sailed. Maybe someday they'll add it to the Mana Prism or Rare Prism shop, but until they do, you'll have to use less elegant solutions. If you're the biggest Yui friend on the planet and want to run her with someone random, check this out. There are 2 command codes that grant card type buffs on hit. Royal Bunny randomly gives one of the 3, so you hit with its card and then chain Yui's NP after it. Actual gotcha, and you have at least a 1 in 3 chance of getting fucked. Great King that looks upon the furthest ends only gives a buster buff, but it does it for the whole party, so it's the more reliable option. At this point you might be thinking, Man, it sure would be nice if there was like an Ox Demon King for quick buffs. I have good news and bad news. There is a craft essence that provides a visible quick buff to your whole party. The bad news is that it's Wandering Tales of Shana-O and requires its holder to die. Also, the buff only lasts for 1 turn, so it'd be immensely impractical to run in a Yui setup. You need someone on the field who isn't Yui to bite it first. Should I even put that image up? Some idiot's gonna screen cap it and go, Fino recommends Wandering Tales? Fino accepts Ushi Supremacy? Alright, little digression. Remember that Tunguska raid guide I put up a little while back? I was talking about the Surtur raid and I list off a bunch of archers that I'd actually recommend. Then I cap it off by saying, failing that, have fun taking your chances with Billy. Some genius watches this and all he gets out of it is, Fino recommends Billy for Surtur, get a load of this guy. And he's been on and on about it ever since. Hey buddy, if you're watching this, learn to use your ears, you dumb fuck. Returning to Yui though, there are some cool CEs that do synergize with her. For non-Castoria setups, consider Dragon's Meridian or Golden Catches the Carp. 50% CEs like this will guarantee access to our Noble Phantasm on turn 1 with just her second and third skills. This brings us to Liberator Strategy, a 20% party battery with NP damage, stars per turn, and an AoE attack reduction. It's a high priority to level, and in combination with Magecraft Elemental, this lets you get 50% charge for Yui on demand. Quite useful in its own right, but once you throw in her starting charge append and a 30% party charger like our old friend Castoria, Yui can hit 100% on turn 1 regardless of what craft essence she's using. I've already talked about Ox Demon King, but another fun option is Prisma Cosmos. If you're going to fully level your Yui and plan to keep her on the field as a healer, this option lets you get the most mileage out of your frontline. In this use case, you'll also find her first skill helpful. A natural creation, subspecies is a 5-turn guts and health regeneration effect with 1 stack of debuff immunity. A notable alternative to Prisma Cosmos for these long-haul builds is Yui's Bondcraft Essence. This gives party arts and crit damage. Generic good stuff for your art setups. Me personally, I'm not a fan of keeping Yui alive on the field. It's annoying to repeatedly get value from Selfless Liberator's buff suite. You're at the mercy of all kinds of other factors, like whether you can build back up to a second Yui NP. Allied skill cooldowns are also a big one. It's a huge hassle. There is an alternative though, with an upfront cost but much more aggressive. You can deliberately keep Yui at level 60, stopping when you unlock her third skill, and equip her with one of the good taunt CEs, Gura Poster Girl if you have it, and Outrage if you don't. This will greatly increase the odds of Yui going down to enemy attacks. Just remember not to pop her first skill. The benefit of this approach is that you get the upfront value of Yui's synergy, and once she's depleted, you get to cycle in a fresh support to keep your main attacker all pumped up. Depending on your turn 1 damage needs, you can either have Yui on the front line or a second Castoria that you replace with Yui to keep the chain going. Also for any Chengong fans out there, Yui's a decent situational pick. With Castoria's help, you can piggyback off Yui's Noble Phantasm to get overcharge on Gong. For fights where this doesn't compromise your overall refund, this has the benefit of reducing the oppressive deployment cost involved in running most Chengong setups. Another fun perk is that Gong is a targetable buster buff. It's usually relegated to support Gong applications, but with Yui's help, a main attacker Gong can exploit it to gain NP damage. Because most Chengong setups end with an Oberon finisher, that's a pretty convenient state of affairs. Yui's an interesting servant. If you don't have the top tier supports, you can run Shousetsu as a fully leveled, statted up frontline buffer who stays alive and tries to heal. But I'd say that Yui really shines as a supplementary buffer, either as a level 60 esports servant or just someone you swap out after you get your buffs running. Is she good? Absolutely, but don't buy into the hype of her being the best this, that, or the other. A lot of the hype around Yui that I've seen is from people who do minimum turn runs, and she does seem quite handy for that application. For the average player, yeah, she's useful, but not to such an extent that I'd consider her a must-roll or anything like that. Unless you have specific attackers, there's some additional investment you need to get her online, and one of her most powerful combo pieces will have been out of circulation for years by the time she releases. Yui Shousetsu falls under the category of nice to have, and I would consider her the real prize of the Ushi Gozen banner. Now let's talk history. In the Eerie video, I covered the deteriorating condition of the samurai class in the early years of the Tokugawa shogunate. These events would come to a head, and Yui would be at the center of this maelstrom. The historical Yui Shousetsu ran a school for military strategy, and he had all sorts of students ranging from big shot daimyo to run-of-the-mill samurai to lowly ronin. But regardless of who they were, Yui would hear the same thing. The shogunate is running us into the fucking ground. And to an extent, this seems to have been deliberate. Yeah, the Tokugawa directly seized land from their former enemies, but to more neutral daimyo they'd say, yeah, you can keep your domain and pass it on to your kid, but you've got to fill out some paperwork to make it official. The catch is that this process was so convoluted, so onerous, and so choked up with red tape that there's a good chance you don't get it done in your lifetime. And once you die? Oh, it seems like there's no inheritor on record for these estates. We'll just hold on to them until we can find a suitable replacement. So they take the land, But this doesn't just come with the farmers working it. It comes with all the samurai that land was sustaining. The thing is, the shogunate already has plenty of samurai. They don't need any more. So they turn them loose. You're out of a job. And unless you want to lose your sword privileges, you're pretty limited in the kind of work you can take on. So the Ronin passing through Yui's school took on an increasingly destitute and desperate character. And the employed samurai knew they could only be a generation away from the same fate. So between their training, Yui and his students got to talking, going from the shogunate sucks to someone should do something about these ingrates to we're doing it ourselves. The ball really got moving once the reigning shogun died, having a mere child as his successor. With the central government caught in this moment of weakness, Yui and his conspirators came up with a plan. They were going to hide barrels of gunpowder across Edo and set them all off at once. This wouldn't level the city, but it would set the capital alight. You see, the cities of Japan were absolute tinderboxes, buildings made of wood and paper. Both were abundant and they wouldn't immediately shake apart and crush you in an earthquake. But this same construction was remarkably flammable, something that would cause major problems well into the 20th century. Suffice it to say that if bombs were going off all around the city, it would start to burn and create an immediate and severe crisis for the shogunate. They'd be forced to deploy the bulk of their apparatus to fight the resulting fire, and according to protocol, the top dogs would take refuge in Edo Castle. With their forces spread thin, Yui and his students will be able to force their way in, massacre the regents, and take control of the little shogun. Then they could force him to lay off the land confiscations that left so many of them diminished. While I don't have any reason to believe the two are related, it's an interesting coincidence that less than 50 years before, on the other side of the globe, another man had also schemed to bring a nation to its knees with barrels of gunpowder and an audacious attack on the seat of government. But much like Guy Fawkes, Yui Shousetsu would never get the chance to pull the trigger. Yui's co-conspirator, Marubashi Chuya, he'd come down with a fever. A pretty serious one in that, and in his delirium, he started talking about things better left unsaid. Word got around and the plotters were undone. Marubashi was seized and executed. Yui, on the other hand, found himself cornered by authorities and opted to take his own life. His motivations were revealed through his will, in which he said he didn't want to destroy the shogunate, just reform it to ease the suffering of the Ronin. Having read this no doubt moving letter, the government carried out their standard procedure for rebel leaders. Yui's family was hunted down, regardless of their role in the incident, and suffered dearly for the misfortune of their birth. Once they were done torturing and executing a bunch of people who didn't really have anything to do with this whole mess, they had a brilliant idea. What if we didn't antagonize the samurai so much? All these dispossessed warriors were a breeding ground for revolution. Acting against the Ronin categorically may just drive them into open revolt. Instead, they opted to clear away the deadwood, so that any fires that do start would have less fuel to drive them. So the shogunate eased back on their reasons for confiscating property, and even let Ronin find work with new masters. While this would abate the immediate threat, there would be flare-ups in subsequent years. Nothing existential, though. The Tokugawa system would calcify, and they'd keep control of the country until a fleet of black ships sailed into Edo's harbor and dealt a fatal blow to their legitimacy 200 years later. Thanks for watching. Like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more, and come watch me at twitch.tv/RenoTyson, where I stream every week, 3 p.m. Pacific time. This time around, I've got Blue Archive, Pal World, Lethal Company, and Fate Grand Order on the schedule, so stop on by for some fun. See you there.